بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. السادة الحضور، نرحب بكم في إحدى ندوات أكاديمية نسيج العلمية المتاحة عبر شبكة الإنترنت عبر منصة نسيج أكاديمي، وننوه إلى أن هذه الندوة يمكن سماعها مترجمة باللغة العربية على القناة المصاحبة، والتي يمكن الدخول عليها بالضغط على الأيقونة الموجودة في أسفل الشاشة وعليها رمز الكرة الأرضية ثم اختيار اللغة العربية. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable speaker, we welcome you all to one of Naseej Academy webinars that aim to share knowledge, ideas, and new trends in the fields of learning, knowledge, and knowledge management. In this webinar, we try to explore the future of knowledge management and where it is headed, especially during and after COVID-19 and the rest of the family, Delta and Omicron, and we don't know what's coming next. Our webinar tonight will cover the following points: the fundamental difference between information and knowledge and information management, and last but not least, knowledge management. Also, that the KM is potential far more powerful than information and knowledge sharing. Also, that knowledge is not power. The ability to influence and act is power. And last again, and not least, the concept of the importance of the communityship. And we are pleased to have our honorable speaker to run this webinar, Mr. David Gartin. Mr. David Gartin is the founder of the Gartin Knowledge Community. He is a worldwide speaker, writer, consultant, coach, and conversational host. He has worked in the knowledge management field for more than 25 years. Best known as a creator of Gartin Knowledge Cafe, which is well known all over the world, and he's focused in the last 7 years on the power of conversation. And last, about his outcomes of his writings, he is currently writing an online book with the title Blue Book, on conversational leadership. We will know more about the future of knowledge management through his speech, and I try to announce what we used to do every time. Please write down your question and query in the chat box or Q and answer box, and we will answer it through Mr. David Gartin at the end of the speech. And thank you for attending at the beginning, and we promise you that you will have a valuable and informative presentation through what we will share by Mr. Gartin. Mr. Gartin, the virtual floor is yours.
Okay, a big thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I'm truly delighted to be here again. We were just saying that this must be 5, 6, 7 years since I was in Saudi Arabia and managed to give a talk in person, but it's just, I think, truly amazing that we can do this now.
Yes.
Through the technology. So let me share my screen. Hopefully this all works fine. Just bear with me a moment from the beginning. Okay, so I guess good afternoon, good evening, depending quite where you all are. So what I want to do is look at the future of knowledge management, and in some ways not so much where I think it's heading, but more where I would like it to head, and that will become apparent as my talk progresses. Now, I think Dr. Abdullah has pretty much introduced me and made the key points about who I am. I think one thing I would add is that I guess as I get older with age, I'm far more concerned with the problems we face in the world, especially in these troubled times, and maybe our inability to cope with the problems as well as we might, and in particular our human human irrationality, if you will. And as Dr. Abdullah explained, I'm writing a book. It's a cross between a blog and a book, strange sort of word, on conversational leadership. It's online. You can access it quite freely. And so everything I talk about this evening, you will find online in one form or another. So this is the URL, conversational-leadership.net. And for any of you who are not familiar with the Knowledge Cafe, this is one of my favorite photos from a Knowledge Cafe I ran a few years ago. All of our Knowledge Cafes end with people sitting in a circle like this, and we have a conversation in a circle. Everyone at least is physically equal, yes. And in a small circle like this, you can have some, really quite wonderful conversations. But that's the cafe is another story. So before I start to look at the future of things, I'd like to take a little look to the past and ask you in your own mind, when do you think knowledge management started? Now, I suspect that most of you would probably say sometime in the 1990s, maybe 1995. A few years ago, before I was starting to do a lot of reading and thinking, I would have said the same thing. But actually today, I believe knowledge management started much earlier. In fact, a lot earlier. I think that knowledge management started maybe 60 to 70,000 years ago, when something really, in human history, something quite magical happened. Probably the biggest event in the whole of human history. And that was the birth, the emergence, the development of language. And the interesting thing about language, although other animals can communicate, human beings, Homo sapiens, we are the only species on this planet that has a language, has a grammatical language. It's the thing that separates us from the animal kingdom. And that revolution, Yuval Harari, in his book Sapiens, calls it the cognitive revolution. But also at times it gets called the Great Leap Forward or the cultural Big Bang. And you can see why. So let's just say a few words about that revolution, because it is so significant. Really before language, before the cognitive revolution, we human beings, we evolved relatively slowly. We passed down our knowledge through our genes. We passed it down genetically. But with the cognitive revolution, that genetic evolution, slowed tremendously, if not ceased. And we started to evolve culturally. We started to pass down our knowledge through our culture. And so with this revolution came three fundamental human abilities. First of all, language. Secondly, the ability to build social bonds through gossip. Now, there's a whole other story there, and I don't have time to go into. If that statement fascinates you, go take a look at this book, Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language by Robin Dunbar. Those of you in the KM field will be familiar with the Dunbar number. This is Robin Dunbar, anthropologist of the Dunbar number. And it's a fascinating story of how our language evolved and how it came about through the social bonds that were formed through conversation, through gossip. And the third item is the ability to discuss abstract concepts such as love, beauty, or even religion and God. So this was a major revolution in human history. I often call it, the first knowledge revolution. And so here we started to learn from each other through teaching, imitation, and other forms of social transmission. Now, for the very first time, we could pass down our knowledge from generation to generation culturally. Knowledge management was born some 50, 60, 70,000 years ago. We're not too sure quite when. Clearly happened over a longish period. So keep that in mind, because it says a lot about who we are. And if I have time, I'm going to come back to it at the very end. So I say I want to look at the future knowledge management. I break knowledge management down into 4 levels if I'm trying to look at the components of knowledge management. 2 of those levels reflect knowledge management as it is today, and the second 2 levels reflect the future as I would like to see it. I say this isn't a prediction of where it's going, it's a prediction of where I would like it to go. So just keep that distinction in mind. So these are the 4 levels. Number 1, information management. 2, knowledge sharing. 3, sense making and decision making. And 4, agency and communityship. And a few of those words will make a lot more sense as I progress. So let's start by looking at level 1, information management. And this is important. It's an important distinction in my mind. When we think about knowledge, there's often confusion. People have got different definitions of what knowledge is. They've got different definitions of what knowledge management is. What I'm trying to do is make a little bit of sense, make it a little clearer as to what this is all about. So you'll find 2 definitions of knowledge that are in common use. The first one here is probably the most common view of knowledge, and that is that knowledge comes in 2 forms. It can be tacit, the knowledge in your head, the knowledge in your mind is your tacit knowledge, and anything in a database or in a book would be termed explicit knowledge. So that's one way of defining knowledge, one way of looking at knowledge. The second way is a little different. The second way says knowledge only exists in your head, in your mind, and anything captured and encoded is information. So anything in a database, anything digital, anything written down, a photograph, what have you, is not knowledge, it's information. And probably 60% of the population would go for the first definition, and maybe 40% for this second definition. A few years ago, I would have gone for the first definition as being a good working definition. Today, I much prefer the second definition. I believe that knowledge, it's not belief, I define knowledge as only existing in the human mind, and everything else is information. And the reason I like that definition is it makes it so much easier to distinguish information management from knowledge management. Because now you can say information management is practiced by improving the systems that capture, store, and transmit information. It's about books, it's about libraries, but more than anything else today, it's digital, it's about IT, it's about computers. Yes, this is the essence of information management. Knowledge management is about people. It's about the things that computers cannot do, at least cannot do today, or not do terribly well. And that's reasoning, thinking, making sense of information, making decisions, acting on those decisions and innovating. These are the things that only people can do. Yeah. So this is how I distinguish between information management and
David, if you allow me, just because the interpreter or the translator just need a little bit to raise the voice so he can hear it clearly and translate.
Okay, so I just need to speak a little louder and clearer. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit, yes. And the mic just keep a little bit away, just to have this echo away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. And so I've seen knowledge management often defined like this, that knowledge management is about getting the right information to the right people at the right time. It's a very narrow view of knowledge management. And in fact, it's not really knowledge management at all. It's information management. And so this first level, in some ways, is not knowledge management. As I say, it's information management. But if you keep in mind that KM should be about making better decisions, clearly to make better decisions, you need high quality information. So this level, this first level, is like a foundation level for knowledge management. And I think, unfortunately, for some organizations, probably many organizations, this is all there is to KM. You know, they're very technically oriented. It's very technocentric. Yeah. So this is the first level. It's not really knowledge management, but it's essential. And let's look at the second level. And this is knowledge sharing. And this is really the heart of knowledge management as it is today. And I'm not going to go into great depth. Those of you who work in the field, you know, will be very familiar with it. This is fundamentally about people sharing the knowledge. It's not about the technology. It's not about information. This is about knowledge. It's primarily about conversations. So we're looking at peer-to-peer learning tools such as peer assist, after-action reviews, and the like. These are the sorts of tools that we're very familiar with. But it's also got a technology aspect, blogging and capturing information, you know, informal information, informal knowledge in wikis would also be seen as part of knowledge sharing. I mean, knowledge sharing is so much at the heart of knowledge management today that many organizations don't use the term knowledge management. They use the term knowledge sharing. They think it's more descriptive. And yes, it is more descriptive of maybe what they do, but I think it's very limiting in terms of what knowledge management could be. So this second level is primarily about people, primarily about conversation, and just a little bit about IP. And I think for the vast majority of organizations, KM stops right there. Yeah, KM doesn't go beyond these first two levels. I came across this definition of knowledge management surprisingly only yesterday when listening to a podcast. This is from a gentleman called Giovanni Piazza. And back in 2017, he was the global head of collaboration and knowledge for KPMG International. And he kind of summed it up quite easily, if you like, quite simply, as he says here, that knowledge management is about helping people find things and helping people find each other. It's a very nice, clean, simple, crisp definition of what knowledge management is today for most organizations. Yeah. So let's, those are the first two levels. And what I want to do now is move on and look at the second two levels, which I think more reflect the future of KM as I would like to see it. And it's not that some of this isn't already going on. It's just not going on at any sort of scale, at least to my knowledge. So let's look at sense making and decision making. This is an interesting topic, as you will see. The first thing I want to look at is the nature of knowledge, and something I call the knowledge delusion. Now, bear with me on this. I want to take you through this slowly because this is relatively new to me, and it's, I think, if you're involved in knowledge management, it's a very important insight. So the first thing I'd like to say to you or ask you is, do you believe the Earth orbits the sun or the sun orbits the Earth? Now, I hope you believe the Earth orbits the sun. Yeah? But think about it, that goes against all your experience. you see the sun rise in the east and sets in the west. It's reasonably obvious that from experience, from observation, direct observation, that the sun orbits the earth. If you went back a few hundred years and tried to explain to somebody that no, it's an illusion, the earth is actually spinning and the earth is actually orbiting the sun, at best you'd be laughed at. At worst, like Paul Bruno, you'd be burnt at the stake by the Catholic Church for heresy. Yeah? So the point here is, I don't think any one of us, unless we're maybe more scientifically educated than even I am, could explain why we know that the earth orbits the sun. The reason we actually know it is because we were taught it. We read it in a book, our parents taught it to us, our teachers taught it to us. So we know it in a very shallow sense. We don't know it in a deep sense. We couldn't prove it. We couldn't necessarily put forward the evidence for it. So in this sense, our knowledge that the earth orbits the sun is somewhat of a delusion. And I want to take this one step further. Greta Thunberg, what does she know about climate change? Seriously, with all respect to Greta, she knows absolutely nothing about climate change at that deep level. You and I'm sure all of us, have got our own opinion about climate change, human-made climate change, whether it's true or whether it's false. Yeah? But have we read the scientific papers? Have we weighed up the scientific evidence? Have we looked at that evidence and understood it and come to a balanced conclusion that it's true or false? I suspect none of us have. And if we did, do we have, we're not climate scientists. So do we have the ability to ask, to understand, make sense of those scientific papers? No, we don't. Yeah. What do? We either trust the scientific community and what they tell us, or we don't trust the scientific community. It's about trust. But then think for a second, it's worse than that. It's not that we trust or distrust the scientific community. We trust or distrust mainstream media or social media because they're the intermediary between us and the scientific community. We're not talking, we're not interfacing, interacting with the scientific community ourselves. Our knowledge, our so-called knowledge, comes from the media, comes from mainstream media, comes from social media. And we should know by now not to trust the media. Yes? So some people will trust one channel, somebody will trust another channel. It's not about knowledge at a deep sense. It's about who we trust and who we distrust. And I think this is a very important insight when we're thinking about knowledge management, especially on a global scale. This is a quotation from Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel laureate, and many of you will be familiar with his work. Well-known book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He sums it up, I think, very nicely here. For some of our most important beliefs, we have no evidence at all, except that people we love and trust hold these beliefs. And then, considering how little we know, the confidence that we have in our beliefs is preposterous. Yeah? Just let that sink in for a moment or two. Yes? So the point here is we don't know stuff. We trust people, not who know stuff necessarily, we trust people who we believe know stuff. This is This is the knowledge delusion, if you will. The point here is that knowledge is communal. Each and every one of us, if we think of the sum of human knowledge as being a vast jigsaw, each and every one of us have just got a few small pieces, and it takes our global community and lots of pieces of that jigsaw to come together to create the totality of our knowledge. And I think this is, well, one, it's very humbling that we don't know as much as we think we do. But two, it's very invigorating to think that, we come together as a global community to build and maintain this community of knowledge. Okay. The second sort of delusion that is very much related to the first is that as individuals, even if we did have superminds, we can't know everything. The world is often referred to these days as being a VUCA world, that it's volatile, that it's uncertain, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's confusing, it's ambiguous, yes, and the world's changing very, very rapidly. So it's actually impossible for one person, one manager, or one very smart person to understand everything about what's going on in the world. And in a business sense, an organizational sense, managers often know far less than their staff because they're just too far away from what's going on in the business. So this is another important thing to understand. But again, it just adds to the weight that knowledge is communal. The other delusion is what I call the reasoning delusion, or the thinking delusion. And this is really important to understand as well. Reasoning is the process of thinking about something to help us come to better beliefs and decisions. Now, what's interesting about reasoning, there's a massive amount of evidence that we're not very good at it as individuals. But the funny thing about that, you would think that human evolution would have shaped our minds such that we were good at reasoning. So the question is, why are we not, as individuals, why are we not as good at reasoning as we are? If you go to Wikipedia, you'll find almost 200 cognitive biases, cognitive flaws even, and ways in which we make sense of things that are not reasonable or accurate, yes? And the most common one of these is called confirmation bias, or my side bias. And this is a tendency to believe the things we want to believe. By and large, we're not rational creatures. We are rationalizing ones. We come to a conclusion, and then we look for the evidence, and just the evidence to support that conclusion, yes? But this is an interesting issue. If you want to look at those 200 or so biases, simply Google cognitive bias codex, and you will find a description of them all. And again, it's quite humbling. You realize just how bad we are at thinking, at reasoning. Okay. Now, a few years ago, I think about 5 years ago, Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber, two psychologists, put forward a new theory of human reasoning. They called it the argumentative theory of human reason. And basically, what they're proposing is that reason didn't evolve for us to think better as individuals. It evolved to help us exchange arguments with each other. So in other words, reason thinking did not evolve to help us reason individually, but to do it together, to do it socially. Now this is just a theory. It's one that I rather like because it does seem to make an awful lot of sense given the evidence. The key point to make here, I don't know how this worked in Arabic, but in English the word argument has got negative connotations. You know? So when they talk about argumentative reasoning, they're not talking about having angry or hostile debates. They're talking about engaging in polite conversation, critiquing the merits, the flaws and deficiencies of different ideas. Yes? And so I tend to prefer the term social reasoning to this rather long-winded term, the argumentative theory of human reasoning. Yes. So again, in a social way, in a community way, it would seem that we've evolved to think together, to reason together, to reason communally. And you might just start to be seeing a theme in what I'm saying here, that, you know, we are a community of human beings. So this is social reasoning. Reasoning is social, it's communal. Now, I don't think any of my talks I ever give about knowledge management, there's not one that doesn't contain this slide, this quotation. It's one of my favorites by far. It was written by David Weinberger in the Clue Train Manifesto some 20 years ago. He says, for all our knowledge, we have no idea what we're talking about. We don't have a clue. We don't understand what's going on in the world. And this is the key piece. Knowledge management shouldn't be about helping us to know more. It should be helping us to understand better. And this is just confirming some of the things I've just been talking about. How do we understand things? We do it through stories. We do it through the anecdotes. We do it through the conversations that we've been having initially 50,000 years ago around the campfire. Yeah, this is what knowledge management should be about: making better sense of things, not cramming our heads full of information, knowledge. Now, another quotation for you, although this is more of a definition than a quotation. I hope many of you are familiar with the work of Nancy Dixon. She, like myself, is very focused on the role of conversation in knowledge management. If you don't know her, just Google her. She's got an amazing blog where she writes regularly about conversation. At the moment, doing a lot of podcasts where she's interviewing a lot of really interesting people. Again, fundamentally around the role of conversation. And this is her definition of something that often gets called collective sense-making. So collective sense-making is a conversation event where people intentionally come together for the purposes of using their different perspectives, their varied cognitive abilities to make sense of an issue or problem that they're facing. Yes. So this is the communal thinking, if you will, the communal making sense of problems, making sense of issues, in order that we can make better decisions. And I'm not going to go into it today, but those of you who are familiar with the Knowledge Cafe process know that the Knowledge Cafe is a very powerful collective sense-making tool. So just kind of summarizing here, one of the best ways to make sense of an issue in our complex world, and in turn make better decisions, and in turn innovate more wisely, is to bring a cognitively diverse group of people together in conversation, in dialogue. And the key piece here, again, unfortunately I don't have time to go into depth, is the term cognitively diverse. You want people not who are maybe racially diverse or gender diverse. You want people who think differently. You actually want people who are going to look at a situation and come up with different arguments, come up with different conclusions, and then come together in respectful conversation, respectful dialogue to figure out the best approach to an issue. This is what collective sense making is fundamentally all about. So this is the third level, in my mind, of knowledge management, nothing to do with IT. And it's kind of been emerging, it's kind of been around for a little while, but personally, I don't see many organizations taking it seriously. And it's probably one of the most serious things that organizations could be doing. We need to be making better sense of what's going on in the world, especially today, and we need to be making better decisions. And we can't do it individually. We've got to do it socially. We've got to do it communally. Yeah. So this is the third level, and it's the level, I think, more than anything, I would like to see taken more seriously in the world today. Okay. So let's move on and look at my fourth level, which is agency and communityship. And this is a quotation from this gentleman, Michael Schrage. He's I think a collaborative consultant or researcher at MIT. He said this some 20 years ago, and the actual word he used in describing knowledge management wasn't rubbish. It was a derogatory word that I couldn't repeat here. Because what he's saying is I can give somebody perfect information, perfect knowledge, and it won't change their behavior one iota. It won't change their behavior at all. And this is the key point, that knowledge is not power, or knowledge alone is not power. Power is power. The ability to act on knowledge is power. He says most people in most organizations don't have the ability to act on the knowledge they possess. And I have a good friend, knowledge manager, works for a large organization. We used to regularly have conversations about knowledge management. So I knew how she thought about knowledge management and how she saw it. And we had some very similar views. And at some point she asked me, she said, David, I've got to create a new knowledge management strategy for my manager. Could you review it for me? And I said, yeah, no problem. When I came to review it, at best I was surprised, at worst I was horrified, because it didn't reflect any of the things that we were talking about. It didn't really reflect any of the things that I know she believed. And so we had a conversation and I said, why have you written this? And her answer was, if she'd written a strategy that maybe you and I, the two of us together, would have agreed on, her boss wouldn't have accepted it. That she couldn't convince her boss to adopt the strategy that she believed to be the correct one. So she had written a strategy that she knew her boss would accept. And that just seemed to me, well, at one level crazy, but at another level perfectly perfectly reasonable. Yes. So this, I think, is a big issue in many organizations. And if you stop and think about the barriers to acting, you've got perfect knowledge, you know exactly what needs to be done. There are many reasons, many barriers to actually acting on that knowledge. And I won't read, well, I'll read a few of them out. You mightn't accept it as true. You fail to understand it, not appreciate its relevance, too busy to act on it, not have the budget or resources to put it into action, not be able to convince your manager. There are so many barriers to acting on knowledge. Yeah. And this, I think this is a major issue in the knowledge management field. So knowledge alone is not power. If you've got authoritative power, yep, then you can get things done. If you don't, then self-motivation, taking responsibility, the ability to act and to influence and work with people, especially those in authority, is power. So you've got to look for your source of power in a different place. You can't order someone to do something. You have got to look to influence people, and as I say, especially those in authority. So this is a skill that gets overlooked and really needs to be developed. And I'm just repeating myself here, really, that it's about influence. It's about building relationships. And again, it comes back to conversation. So much of what I talk about and what I do comes back to conversation time and time again. Right, so that's a little bit about agency. Let's look at this strange world called communityship. This gentleman here, I hope many of you know, it's Henry Mintzberg. He's a Canadian management consultant, I think professor or retired professor. Mainly, I think, in his heyday, focusing on strategy. And he's come up with this word, communityship. Interestingly, he doesn't define it precisely, but he does describe how you might recognize it in an organization. And he says, you have found it when you walk into an organization and are struck by the energy in the place, the personal commitment of the people, and the collective engagement in what they're doing. In such an organization, people don't have to be formally empowered because they are naturally engaged. And I often think it would be wonderful to work in an organization like that. And I'm not so sure so many exist. Henry Mintzberg also says something else about community. He says an enterprise is a community of human beings, not a collection of human resources. And I would add, we're also not a collection of human capital, I think is a term that's often used and is a rather derogatory term to describe human beings. And if you think about what a community is, fundamentally it's a group of people who share things in common, who work together towards a common purpose that they care about. And I think, importantly, a group of people who really care passionately, care deeply about each other. This is the essence of maybe a perfect community. And what he's saying is that we should see organizations as communities, not as collections of human resources. And I tried to define, I tend to like definitions. And so I tried to define communityship. And I say it's where everyone in a community, in an organization, by and large, takes responsibility for that community as a whole. And these are the key words: practices leadership and works together towards a common set of goals. There's this practice leadership I want to dive into. Many people see leadership as a position of authority, yes? And the problem is, and I've been talking about, the fact that one person, one authoritative leader, can't make sense of the world. What we need in the world today is everyone to see themselves as a leader, or at least see leadership as a practice and not as a position of authority, because we can all choose to practice leadership even if we're not appointed leaders. I hope you're familiar with Stephen Covey. I discovered Stephen 30 years ago with his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In the industrial age, leadership was a position. In the knowledge age, leadership is a choice. I think very wise words from Stephen. And another gentleman, Ron Heifetz at Harvard. And this is well worth just reflecting on for a few moments. He says we own collective responsibility for the problems we face in the world. Yes, the problems that we create and the problems that impact us. We will not make the changes we wish to see, we will not make the improvements we wish to see based on authority-based leadership, but rather with each of us taking a leadership role. Now, Ron's been teaching leadership at Harvard, I think, for many, many years, and knows a lot about leadership. And again, he's just reinforcing this point. We need to see leadership as a practice, not as a position of authority. And Stephen Covey again. Most people think of leadership as a position and therefore don't see themselves as leaders. Yep. So this fourth level is about, it's much more about human psychology. It's much more about behavior. So I think if we don't come to understand under the human aspects of all of this, yeah, the messy human side of it all, as I say here, the emotions, the fears, the hopes, the aspirations, KM is going to fail. And few, if any, organizations even know the word communityship, never mind take it seriously. And the same with agency. So this is the fourth level. So a few points in summary here. So what I'm saying is we need to move. I would like to see knowledge management move beyond the first two levels of information sharing and knowledge sharing. Yeah. And then I'd like us to make better sense of the information, make better sense of the world through collective sense making. And in turn, if we make better sense of the world, we're in a better position to make improved decisions. We need to develop our capability to act on knowledge because it's as important as knowledge itself. And we need to start to see our organizations as communities, and we need to practice leadership. Now, originally I was going to stop here, but I've added a little addendum, and I've got time. I've got 10 minutes left, and I just want to take you through a little addendum. I tagged it on to this presentation just an hour or so ago. It'll only take me 5 minutes to take you through it, and it's another look. It's a different look, a different slant on the future of knowledge management. Okay, so let's take a look at it. I talk about 3 knowledge revolutions in our human history. The first one I talked about right at the beginning of this talk, the emergence of language 60,000 years ago or thereabouts. And this clearly was the biggest knowledge revolution in human history. Yeah. And then we have to run forward quite a while to 1440 and Gutenberg's printing press in Germany. Yeah. Now for the first time we could capture so much of our knowledge in printed form and distribute it at scale. Yes, clearly we could do it before then, but now with the printing press, we could do it at scale. And a few years later with the steam printing press, we had an even greater impact. Now, this I think was, again, just a major, major revolution in knowledge management, in the ability to pass down knowledge, to share knowledge, and to pass it down from generation to generation. And a whole load of things flowed from the printing press and sort of mass production of books. You know, a whole load of other revolutions, principally the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and then a whole series of 4 so-called industrial revolutions that have taken place over the last 200, 300 years. Yeah. So the printing press, the book, just had a massive, massive impact on the world. And now, today, the third knowledge revolution is very much the digital revolution. You probably don't find that too surprising, although I see it a little differently to maybe other people, in that I'm not thinking about artificial intelligence and all the wonderful things that are maybe going on in that arena. If we look at the history of the digital revolution, it pretty much goes back to the end of the Second World War, early computers in 1945. And then, of course, a major leap forward with the World Wide Web. Now, for the first time, we're slowly building up global knowledge, if you like, digitally. We've been doing that now for the last, 30 years. And then year 2000, social media, and 2007, the Apple iPhone and the Android phone just a year or so later. I think what's interesting about the smartphone is that it's not a phone, it's a supercomputer in your pocket. It does all sorts of amazing things. And I think the 2 principal things are that, one, it gives you access to the web, it gives you access to the sum of human knowledge, and a lot of rubbish as well, which is another problem. But also it's a super connecting device. We can pretty much talk to billion, or potentially talk to billions of people around the world. And then what's really interesting, and I think far more significant, are products like Zoom that we're using right now. That's only maybe 10 years old, maybe not even that. And with products like Zoom, not only can we do seminars like this globally, but we can have conversations on a global scale. And so I think there are 2 components to this third knowledge revolution, 2 components that I think are important. First of all is that ability to access and contribute, which is just as important, to what's increasingly called the global information ecosystem, the web. But secondly, and I think this is more important, I think history will show that this will have been the more important development. And that's this ability to converse, the ability to have conversations with anyone, anywhere in the world. I'm not just talking one-to-one, I'm talking group conversations, like, for example, my knowledge cafes, where technologies like Zoom and Teams allow us to do that. And at the moment, we've got a human translator translating what I'm saying from English to Arabic. Increasingly, we're going to have that automated. I'm sorry, Mr. Translator, I've forgotten your name, but I suspect you're going to have a job for a few years yet. But increasingly, that translation is going to be handled automatically. So this ability to have conversations with people around the globe, regardless of language, is going to be seen as a massive step forward. Yeah. And as I'm saying here, I'm calling it the third knowledge revolution. So a thought for you, a thought to leave you with: if Gutenberg revolutionized the world, is what we're going through now a Gutenberg moment, where each and every one of us can practice leadership, converse and collaborate globally. Just think about that. We've got the technology, we've got the ability to do it. And it's come at an interesting time with COVID. We've got many, many other problems in the world, whether it's global warming, whether it's the plastic and pollution we're pumping into the oceans. We've got a lot of problems that we need to solve as a human species, as humanity. And is this third knowledge revolution, is this going to help us solve it? Or is it going to help us further destroy the world? Think about that. I'll stop there. I'm pretty much on the hour and say thank you for taking so long to listen to me. And I'm going to hand back to Dr. Abdullah and take some questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Actually, we don't need you to stop. You're stimulating a lot of ideas and thoughts. So it's very interesting. So let me start with thank you very much, Mr. Gartin, for this interesting and informative presentation, which really helped us to see through your crystal ball the future of the knowledge management. Yeah. Also, now and before we open the gate to the questions, I have one comment on your statement, the knowledge is in the mind. This reminds me with another webinar we did it a long time ago. They said that in addition to the C drive in your laptop or your PC, there is a B drive, which is the brain drive that in your mind,
yes,
which you store your knowledge. And this is what the tacit knowledge just always represent obstacle or challenge for the people just to move it from tacit to explicit. So thank you for raising this one. And let's quickly move to the first question, because I know that you have another commitment after our webinar, which is we totally appreciate that you allocate this time. It's from Mr. Fadl Ali, and he said that you mentioned the tacit knowledge there are a difference between tacit and implicit knowledge. I can say that it's similar or something different, but please comment on this, the implicit and tacit knowledge.
I must admit, I never particularly make a distinction. I think the way they're normally distinguished is that one is knowledge that we don't know that we have. So the one is knowledge that we have in our brains and that we know that we have it, and the other is knowledge that we have that we don't know we have. There's a lot of things that we just do automatically, and I've forgotten which way around it is. I've never as I say, I'm very much focused on that second one, where I don't think personally, I don't make the distinction between implicit.
Yeah,
so I'm not best qualified to answer that question, but a little Googling will give you the answer. Or actually, the little Googling will probably give you several different answers. That's the problem.
Yeah. I think sometimes there is using just mutual between both of them, but both of them are the other side of the explicit or materialistic.
You see, one of the ways I think about this, and the way that I like to think about it, the way that I do, is I could give you a document written in Mandarin. You could give me a document written in Arabic.
It's fine.
And it's not knowledge to me at all. It's information. So you need the knowledge to read a document in Arabic. You need the knowledge of Arabic. You need the ability to read it. You need the ability to make sense of it. And so for me, anything on a piece of paper, in fact, it's just a collection of squiggles, which is actually true. Probably more true of Arabic than English. That's maybe unfair, but it's
fine.
But you understand what I'm saying. You need knowledge to make sense of information.
Yes.
And once it's in your head, it becomes knowledge. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you for this answer, Abdurrahman. Mr. Abdurrahman Marzouki says that how can we estimate with precision the level of knowledge of modern days influencer?
With precision, I'm not too sure when it comes to human beings and
he needs to estimate the level of the knowledge.
That you
modern influencer. Modern
that
day
you can do
influencer.
anything with precision. It's I guess when it comes to scientific knowledge, you know, factual knowledge, more factual knowledge, but for everyday work, there's no real precision in. I'm not too sure I really understand the meaning of the question. I guess.
For my understanding, because I'm literally read his question.
Right.
He said that how can we estimate with precision? I think let's estimate in the very accurate or very clear way the level of knowledge of modern day influencers. You know that there is many people just playing the role of influencer over the social media.
I guess I could interpret that question as, you know, how do you know if somebody is saying something about COVID or saying something about American elections or whatever, how do you know what they're saying is true or not? Again, that is not easy. That is not easy to do. I mean, people would tend to go with the belief that they're predisposed to believe. It's extremely difficult. So let's just take something like the American elections. You know, were they rigged or not? You or I don't really know. All the information that we're getting about the American elections comes through the media channels. We're going to get a different story depending as to whether we watch CNN or whether we watch Fox News. We're going to get a different story depending on who we follow on social media. This is kind of really at the heart of the problem that we face. How do we know who's speaking the truth? We don't.
Yes, yeah. It's a dilemma. It's a challenge.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Muhammad Salahuddin just asking, please thank you and Nسيج Academy very much about this webinars, and he said that my question is, if knowledge management is all about converting tacit knowledge into explicit, how sense-making cafe is converting the tacit into documented knowledge?
The cafe,
like this.
Right? Okay. Yeah. The cafe, the knowledge cafe, is not about turning tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. It's not about documenting anything. It's about thinking together. It's about making sense of what's going on in a social way through having those conversations. And the idea is that each person is probably going to come away from that conversation as a different person. They're going to come away seeing the problem, seeing the issue differently. But the chances are that the group are all going to see it the same is probably still unlikely. But they're hopefully, if that's worked well, they're going to come a lot closer to some sort of truth. And so it's about making sense. It's not about turning tacit into explicit. You would need, and if you were looking, one person could come away from that cafe and write something down. If he or her, their views had changed as a result of that conversation, they could write a blog post, they could write an article, they could write a scientific paper even. but that's quite separate from the cafe itself.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you, David. And we have another. This is, I call it the old and renewable questions. How we can make people feel comfortable about sharing their knowledge without being afraid about losing their job, their position, their power.
Yeah.
Interesting one.
This is a perennial knowledge management question, and it's really got to come from the top. It's if the
Yes.
I know a few people right now. I know one person right now working in an organization where nobody will share their knowledge. They all live in fear of losing their job. So they're all competing with each other. They're all afraid. If they make mistakes, they'll cover them up. If they can blame somebody else for a mistake, they'll blame somebody else. And management do nothing to change that, to actually influence the culture, to make it clear that no, you're not going to get fired. You're more likely to get rewarded and promoted if you share. So it comes down, I think, to the management of the organization. If that's not right, then the vast majority of people are simply not going to share, and they're going to laugh at the idea. They're going to laugh at the idea of actually doing it. So, yeah.
If you allow me, David, in this one, just to give some elaboration from my experience in Naseej Academy, we used to make webinars and training courses about knowledge sharing, and we used to start such activity with saying that the sharing as an action is not equal losing what you share. Maybe you increase, maybe you improve this one. Also, it's related also to the management and the way that the institution just deal with this issue. The more that they reward the whole team, not the individuals, about sharing knowledge. For example, they're just sharing or providing or introducing ideas. It belongs to the team, not for the one-man show approach, solo one. This also will encourage the people just to share their knowledge without afraid that when I share this one, they will kick me out of the organization. So I think it's two-direction approach from the staff or the people themselves and from the managers, just to show the value of sharing knowledge without being afraid that I will take this knowledge somehow and I will not need you anymore, or I will move it to another new person. This is just my point of view about this part.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions from Professor Amal Wajih. It comes from the WhatsApp. Okay. Once you are talking about the future of knowledge management, how you see creating and sharing knowledge in the metaverse comparing with the real one? I think it's a new one. Thank you.
I say my focus of my work and everything is on the people side of things, on face-to-face conversations, and increasingly conversations through this medium such as Zoom or Teams. Quite how it's going to work in the metaverse, it's not something I've looked at. It's not something I've thought about.
But at least you think that it will not be the same, I think, right? It will lose some intimacy somehow.
what's interesting, if I just take Zoom, if I just take, say, you and I having a conversation on Zoom.
Yeah.
2 people, 3 people, 4 people, maybe small group having a conversation on Zoom. Yes, clearly there's some intimacy lost. But what surprises me is it's not so bad. In fact, it's just amazing that we can do it. It's amazing that we're doing what we're doing now. I have regular conversations. I have a good friend in Toronto, and we have one-on-one conversations on a regular basis. And yes, it would be a little better if I was with him, but we still have pretty good, pretty deep conversations, meaningful conversations through Zoom. I have a friend in Munich, the same, somebody in Singapore. Now, I guess as the technology gets better, and, maybe we've got avatars in 3D and what have you. I'm not so sure it's going to improve things by an order of magnitude. I really don't. I'm very much more interested, very much more focused on, again, face-to-face human interaction. That's how we evolved.
Blood.
Yeah. So
not through your avatar.
not through my avatar, but hey, I guess when I'm long gone, the technology may well have evolved to a stage that it's quite different, but certainly not right now.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Mr. Ibrahim Fayumi just say that. What about the servant leadership in organization? Do we need it for our organization to improve the sense of the community?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it comes back to that whole idea of communityship. Again, the one person I'm thinking about who I know well and talk to a lot about the organization they're working in. There is no opportunity for people to talk and get to know each other, either face to face or through Zoom. Everything is business focused. Everything is kind of transactional. They'll come together for meetings to talk about issues or problems or new projects or what have you. But there's very little room or space for getting to know each other as people, or getting to understand who the other people are, who they really are, getting to understand them deeply, and getting to maybe not quite love them, but to care about them.
Accept them. Yeah. So you believe in people, not labels. So this is very important. Conversation.
To really care about them, to know a little bit about their history and their background, and maybe why they behave the way that they do. And even if you don't like it when they get angry at times, or some of their behaviors, you understand them and appreciate them and respect them enough.
We have another question in Arabic. Say that which is part of the other? Science is part of knowledge, or knowledge is part of science? So I think it's a logic question. It's fit to you, David. I guess it's fit to you. It fits to you, I think. Which comes first, the chicken or egg? Even that it's clearly knows the chicken comes first. But seriously, I think this is very important about just to look at the knowledge in a way that is it. What we can say, is it something part of the whole human scientist, that the humanity, or I think it's the opposite.
I mean, science is effectively a methodology for trying to create validated knowledge, if you will, to test that the ideas, the theories, whatever that we come up with are are reasonable.
Yes.
So yeah, so knowledge, knowledge, yeah, knowledge is a product of science, or can be a product of scientific thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're just getting into. I usually steer clear a lot of this, because you then you get into philosophy, and it gets very deep, and you've only got to just take a look on the web, just read anything about the epistemology, or
Yeah.
And you realize that a lot of great minds have thought about this and written about this over many thousands of years, and and no one really agrees. It's a very complex sort of topic. And I know for myself, I try to be very pragmatic and very practical, and not get into those more philosophical questions.
Yeah. And we have many comments here. Some of the audience say that the science is broader than the knowledge, and others say that we understand, or we know something, but we don't have knowledge about something. I think, as you said, that it's a philosophical thing, but at least from my point of view, science needs some knowledge in specifics or specialities. Comparing what the knowledge it's blocks or not blocks, it's a mix of scientists. So let's keep away about the literally meaning. We talk about the way that we think or share or whatever, dealing or managing the knowledge. Okay, now because of the time is running out of us, we're trying to give a capsulic or graphic answer. But as I told you that we have a lot many questions for you. Measuring knowledge is one of the most challenging types of evaluation. What do you think? What do you think is better to assess theory or practice more? So he's talking here about the measuring of the knowledge, and how we can just. I think there is now some measures. What do you think?
How do you measure knowledge? You can't measure it with a ruler. You can't weigh it. I'm not too sure what is meant, to be honest, by measuring knowledge.
Maybe we can track.
Without wanting to be disrespectful, I'm not so sure the question makes a great deal of sense as I understand it. Maybe something's been lost in translation there. How do you? I mean, you can ask the question.
Yeah.
How do you validate?
As we try to measure what we call it, the skills for the people, even it's sometimes not tangible, but there is some indicators about that the staff or specific.
I mean, I think as a problem is, I mean, all of us who have worked in the knowledge management field, I think we struggle with this all the time. We struggle with the language. So knowledge so often is seen as a substance. It's something that we have. You've got so much knowledge. I've got so much knowledge. Now, is David's knowledge bigger than Abdullah's knowledge? I'm not so sure you can. I mean, you might say that you've got more knowledge than about Arab culture or Arabic language than I have. So let's say you took two English people and say, you can kind of weigh it, but I'm not so sure it's. I guess in the academic sense, taking exams is a measure of. It's not even necessarily a measure of people's knowledge, is it? Because what I'm trying to say is that knowledge can be seen as a substance, something that you've got in your head, something that is kind of tangible. Or you can see knowledge as being a thinking skill, i.e. it's an action. And I think it makes more sense to see it as something dynamic and something that's an action rather than something that's can be weighed.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
At least there is some tools just to measure the maturity level of knowledge management. You know that from APQC, and this is one of our strategic partners. You know APQC, this is like ISO on this one. Yeah. So they have their own tools, and we tried in different workshops and projects. It's called the KMCAT. Capacity, I think, assessment tool, competencies assessment tools. And this is, I think, focusing about trying to see the maturity level or put the organization in a specific maturity level according to specific questions, something like questionnaire.
No, so you can certainly do that. Yes, you can certainly assess. I guess the problem with that, but measure seems to imply a precision.
Yes.
Which with knowledge you can't do, and a measure is so often used to compare, where you could assess one organization on that maturity level, maturity model, and you could assess a very different organization, but could you really tell which was best, given that maybe one was a marketing organization and one was, I know, building jet fighters or something? You know, they're two very different organizations, very different problems, very different approaches to, you know, how they manage their knowledge. It's
because we're trying to stick to the time that you allocated to us, so I appreciate it so much.
Okay.
So we will have just only quick answers for very quick questions again.
Okay.
Yes, the first one is in Arabic from Ms. Hala Abu Al-Ala. Is there factors or things just affect knowledge management? Any factors, any specific things just you see that it's affect the knowledge management? Just mentioning 1, 3 things you see that it's affecting this one.
Again, I'm not. It's
for knowledge management,
a very general question.
For knowledge management as a process, do you think, or what you exactly see as a factor that could affect about this flow of managing the knowledge?
I mean, I think the main factor in all of this is openness, is this ability to have conversations and to have conversations in good faith, to everybody involved to be working together to make sense of the world, to make better decisions, to build all the things I talked about, build community, and what have you. If you've got a very closed organization, if you've got, again, we've touched on it before, if you've got people living in fear of losing their jobs, anything. I guess the key thing here is this whole factor of psychological safety. People need to not be afraid of speaking up and speaking their minds. Actually, that alone could almost be the heart of knowledge management. If everybody in an organization were not fearful at all, felt perfectly happy speaking up and speaking the truth as they saw it, wow, you would change your organization overnight, because that's even in the best of organizations, that's not particularly true. People will think things, and they will never share them for all sorts of different fears. Yeah, it's creating psychological safety that people can speak their minds would be a big factor.
Yeah, okay. Another question, it's can we start organizational culture change before starting knowledge management?
I think the two come together. I mean, this whole idea that you can change culture, that you can have a plan for changing the culture, is a difficult one. I mean, and knowledge management in some ways is like a cultural change in itself. The two go hand in hand.
Yes.
You need to be doing both.
Okay, the last question we have, and we do apologize for all our attendees. We have many questions, and we open to be sent over the email, and we use just to share to this one. The last one is about does the digital transformation increase the importance of having knowledge specialists in every organization? So he linking the knowledge management to the technology and digital transformation. What do you think, David, about this?
Just say that again. Does digital transformation do what?
Increase the importance of having knowledge specialists in every organization.
Having knowledge. What? Having knowledge. Does digital transformation increase the possibility of having
the value? Yeah, the
value
of
people knowledge
working, not just the knowledge, the value of the people who work on knowledge management, like knowledge officer, knowledge, specialist, knowledge manager. That there is different position in this one. He said that maybe digital transformation will give added value or more value for this position as a position in the organization hierarchy, because I think he is pointing to the technology and using the technology within the knowledge management process for specific people.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that knowledge management, kind of is seen to have been born in the 90s, and that was when we were first starting to put PCs and laptops on people's desks and connect them. Like the beginning of digitalization, really affecting each and every person in an organization. So now everybody has got access to far more knowledge, far more digital knowledge than they ever had in the past. And they have the ability to communicate with people in the organization, even if it's through email, never mind through a phone or through Zoom. So now we're living in a very, very different world to what we were 30 years ago. And so we've got this access. We've got phenomenal access to all this digital information, and I think one of the big problems with digital is there's so much information there that the real issue is figuring out what's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff. It's like when we're talking about whether the American elections were rigged or not.
Yes.
Go online. There's a mass of information there. You've got no real way of really knowing what's true and what's false. And there's so many different players and there's so many different people. And it's the same in organizations. There's you can have a lot of digital knowledge stored in corporate databases that for one reason or another is corrupted in some way. I think we're going through a digital transformation right now, and it's causing a lot of issues and a lot of problems, and a lot of the polarization in the world as well is coming from all of this, and it's going to take us a few years to sort our way through it. And I'm probably not answering the gentleman's question, but it's an interesting world, let's put it that way.
Yes, exactly. Once again, we need to thank you so much, Mr. Garteen, and for these really interesting comments and sharing with your knowledge and as I promised our attendees, we have not just a speaker, we have a philosopher, a thinker, a person who is already have his own community, is sharing with their knowledge, trying to all the time just get benefit of this one, asking the people to try it by themselves. So you gave us more than what we expect from this interesting, informative presentation. And this is not the first time that we have we had you before, and I know that this will not be the last time we have you with a new era, new topic that to talk about it. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and effort and all the sharing knowledge you shared with us. And thank you all the attendees. We have another opportunity to invite experts to talk to you in knowledge management and library and learning. So stay tuned to Naseej Academy events. And I leave the last word for you, David, just to wrap up this night, please.
Last word from me. Well, first of all, a big thank you for this opportunity to speak today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. What I like about speaking is it's a little bit like writing as well. It forces you to think through your ideas. It's a knowledge management tool in its own right. And so I've enjoyed that. The questions have been interesting because so many of the questions that you've asked, I've not been able to readily answer. And I think that gives some indication of the complexity and the nuances of
yes, I can feel it.
Of knowledge management and the language that we use as well. I sometimes think that we don't have the appropriate language to discuss knowledge management as well as we might. But to finish, that very last point, that very last slide where I talked about, is this our Gutenberg moment? This is something on my mind at the moment. I mean, and I've just looking at those three revolutions, the emergence of language, the book, its ability to share, in those days, printed knowledge, and now what's going on in the world today. And I look at this technology we're using now. I look at Zoom and saying, look, I can have conversations with some of the best thinkers in the world, around the world today. That is anywhere in the globe. I might have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I can do that. Anybody can do that. And what interests me is when we look back on this period, say 100 years time, when historians look back, what are they going to make of it? Is it going to be like a new enlightenment? Are we going to see a tremendous flowering of ideas? And I don't just mean technical ideas. I don't just mean automated cars and what have you. I mean, maybe new forms of government, new ways of living. Are we going to see some real transformation in the world, or are we going to destroy ourselves? I'd like to think we're going to see a transformation, and I would invite everyone to reflect on that and to reflect on their own ability to influence the direction in which the world is going. Let me just say a few more words, and I know we want to finish. I often think back to my father and my mother growing up in England in the 50s. Yeah, no internet, no TV, no telephone. What they had, that their access to the world's knowledge, if you like, was a newspaper. It was the Daily Mirror, which is a working person's tabloid paper, and the BBC Home Service, which was really a British government propaganda service. Yes, that was their window on the world. They didn't have this ability that we've got now. they had no way of influencing what was going on in the world. And they had no way of judging the quality of what they were reading in the paper or hearing on the radio. So we're sitting here now, like 60, 70 years later, with this ability to access the world's knowledge, to communicate the way we are now. And we need to make the most of it. So figure out what you've got to do, each and every one of you, to create a better world, because we've got that opportunity right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And
let's stop there.
Nice to have you, and let's wait for another round of sharing knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
شكرا للجميع، نلتقي إن شاء الله في إحدى ندوات أكاديمية مرة أخرى. أترككم في أمان الله ورعايته. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Bye. Have a nice holidays.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing this one. Bye bye.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.